The thing is that the lands in and around Nikolaev got lucky back then, in the first half of the 20th century, because Theodosius Kaminsky lived in the city, a unique person with a very difficult destiny and a fascinating fate. According to archive data, he even took part in an expedition by the famous Howard Carter. After heavy summer rainfall, they walked along the left bank of the Inhul River, and if there could have been a settlement there, and they assumed that there could be an ancient settlement, the so-called discovery of a cultural layer took place. That is, they were able to discover fragments of ceramic, bone, and stone crafts on the surface, which is certainly a reason to document the discovery of a new archaeological site. Before he was convicted, he instructed the Voskoboynikov family, who had a circle called Friends of the Museum, to watch over the Dikiy Sad settlement, also known as the Wild Garden, although no archaeological digs actually took place. The Nikolaev Regional Museum of Local Lore. Once located in a rented house, today it occupies an entire three-story building and might even expand and cover a whole block of buildings. And the collection of mineral samples, stuffed birds, fish and animals, corals and tropical plant herbaria, which started it all, has accumulated more than 300,000 different exhibits. Many of those could cause envy even in European museums. For example, a bronze cauldron that's around 3,000 years old. It has only recently revealed its secrets, although far from all of them. In 1954, after the second arrest and rehabilitation of Theodosius Kaminsky, the local historian, archaeologist, public activist, and former director of the Nikolaev Historical and Archaeological Museum returned to Nikolaev, where he continued working as a senior researcher at the Nikolaev Local Lore Museum. It was this period that was the second stage of exploration of the territory located near the confluence of the Southern Bug and Inhul rivers, called the Wild Garden. The Wild Garden settlement is one of the most interesting archaeological monuments in the boundaries of our city. The actual name of our settlement originates from a place in Nikolaev. There was a park area there back in the 19th century. By the end of the century, the park became desolate, and local residents named that territory the Wild Garden, which allows us to give the monument the same name. As a matter of fact, it became an archaeological monument thanks to Kaminsky, who made his first attempt at writing in 1927. The second stage of research came almost 30 years later.
In
1956, he continued gathering information on the Wild Garden. At the time, in Olvia, there was the Black Sea Archaeological Expedition led by Lazar Slavin, former director of the Archaeology Institute, who carried out excavation work in southern Ukraine, particularly in Olvia. Research on the Wild Garden territory was conducted at the same time on the territory where possible, because by that time, in 1956, all of the territory of the Wild Garden, as we know it today, was owned by the USSR Ministry of Defense, and a fuel and lubricants warehouse was located there. It was due to this fact they dug in the main along the fence of the military unit for several weeks. Wrong conclusions were drawn at the time. It was written that it was a Bronze Age monument of the so-called Sabatinevskaya culture. But since it was located within the city, in a built-up area, there was no need to pay it any attention. Similar monuments are well known in the steppe area of Ukraine. Oleg Zhuravlov, a senior researcher at the Archaeology Institute, disagrees fundamentally with the conclusion made by archaeologists who investigated the Wild Garden settlement, for a reason which was to be proven later on. According to him, there may be several reasons why his colleagues deemed the settlement as not having prospects.
Ми ж не знаємо, про що думали.
We don't know what the people who wrote that this settlement was unpromising actually thought. The thing is that there are cases in archaeology when a settlement is considered unpromising, which turns out to be very important in its development.
Своєму розвитку. Наприклад, поселення.
For example, the Mayaki settlement of the Tripoli culture, which was initially considered unpromising and then provided archaeologists with lots of interesting material.
Потому что они заложили 5.
Because they started digging in 5 sites and only found fragments of dishes instead of whole dishes. They saw what was there, where the rest of the settlement was. They discovered buildings, roads, a sawmill and warehouses.
Стояли лесопилка, склады стояли. Мы до сих пор на верхних.
We're still finding traces of a military unit here in the upper layers. We often had to dig our way through asphalt to reach our Bronze Age horizon.
Горизонта бронзового века.
But the course of events could have been different. But the unpromising verdict is not just an annoying mistake. People wrote that settlements were unpromising just to keep them for themselves, and then later come back to them and dig them up. That may have also been the case. However, Kirilla Horbenko believes that there was no evil intent there, and that the conclusion, a fatal one for research, was an unfortunate mistake caused by several factors. The south of Ukraine traditionally contains ancient archaeological monuments: Berezan, Olvia, Chora of Olvia. Slavic specialization was ancient archaeology, not the Bronze Age. So they carried out the research accordingly and made their conclusion that it was not worth excavating. On top of that, there was no access to the territory, since there was a military unit there with barbed wire fences and military guards. And that is how one of the most interesting settlements in Nikolaev region and at the European level fell out of scientific circulation for many decades. Just a few finds from the Wild Garden remain today in the Nikolaev Regional Museum of Local Lore. One of them is a bronze cauldron that has been keeping scientists restless for about a century. These are the cauldron's dimensions. It is 62 centimeters high and can hold 37 liters. Experts believe that such products are very expensive, and one family could not afford one. It is possible that up to 500 people lived in the settlement, and there were several cauldrons for public use. For example, the Harvest Festival or some other event gathered large groups of people. In such cases, they used similar cauldrons to prepare food for a large number of people. The cauldron is made of sheet bronze using rivets.
Спочатку відливалися пласкі штаби металу, потім їх
First, flat metal parts were cast. Then they were riveted, and then the cauldron's body was assembled. The top ring of this cauldron was made from 2 cast slabs, but I'm not sure if they were cast flat and with handles straight away, or whether they were bent.
пласкими одразу з ручками, чи вони відливалися в такому зігнутому стані. Піддон цього казана спочатку відлито було.
The bottom of this cauldron was first cast in a disposable wax mold. It was, in my opinion, coil-shaped.
Мала форму катушки.
The coil was riveted. The bottom was forged, and then all those parts were connected using rivets.
Коли кувався казан, там утворювався.
During the forging process, cracks formed in the cauldron, which were immediately patched up. The shape of the rivets on those patches suggests that they are as old as the cauldron. However, there are later patches on it as well, since the rivets on those are of a slightly different shape.
Мають трохи іншу форму.
It was in use for a quite long time, as evidenced by traces of ancient restoration. I mean the patches on the surface. The handles are made in such a way that when the cauldron is filled with water or a ready dish, it can be lifted from the fire. They specifically used wood for that. The leg is also made in a special way. It was convenient to put such a cauldron in a fire, put wood around it, and heat it up. That's how food was prepared. Researchers believe that the cauldron was carefully looked after and passed down from generation to generation. In this way, it could have served for about a century. It is an assumption, of course, and a fairly bold one at that. But if it was not used every day and was treated with particular care, it could have been used for quite a long time and was passed from generation to generation. From the time it found its place within the walls of the Nikolaev Museum, the artifact has been attracting both ordinary people and researchers. Many scientific publications published the discovery from 12th century BC. This was the reason for a visit to the museum by specialists in the culture of the Bronze Age and steppe cultures and settlements. Today it is still an object of scientific study. Our restoration workers, and there is a restoration center in the museum, continually maintain its appearance by treating it with special substances. It's an open display here. We put it on a mock bonfire so that our visitors would have an idea of how it was used in ancient times. Despite the great interest shown by scientists and ordinary people and the seeming fact that it has been studied comprehensively, for decades the cauldron refused to give the answer to one delicate question posed by scientists. For a long time, we didn't even have a theory on the origin of this bronze. But in 2015, researcher Tatiana Hoshko came to the museum and conducted chemical analysis of the bronze. That is, she took a sample and an analysis was carried out in a special lab in Kiev. Both the trip and the analysis might never have happened. It all started a few years back when the specialists from Kiev received a cauldron for restoration from a museum in Odessa. That really got me very interested. I examined it, studied it, and the way it was forged and put together. Then I got an idea to gather all the known cauldrons of the time and describe their manufacturing technology in detail, since my colleagues were unable to do that.
Мої колеги цього не знають і не можуть цього зробити. І я спочатку попросив.
At first, I asked my colleagues from Nikolaev to send me pictures. They did, and those were not bad, but I still couldn't determine how it was made, whether it was cast, forged, or both. So I went there myself.
Кування, чи і кування, і лиття було. Довелося їхати самі.
Tatiana Hoshko managed to get hold of priceless material in Nikolaev, a piece of metal from a cauldron. It became the basis of the research.
Вони мені дозволили взяти.
They let me take a piece from the bottom of the cauldron, from where it had a hole in it. They let me cut off a piece, and I used the spectrometer we have at the institute to determine its composition.
Спектрометр, який є в нас тут в інституті.
It's arsenical bronze. In terms of chemical composition, the bronze originates from the Carpathians. The thing is that there are no raw materials for making things out of bronze in our region. And while there was no trade the way we understand it today, exchange between tribes was widely developed. Therefore, the inhabitants of our region, including the settlement called Wild Garden, which we're talking about, could send cattle, grain, and fish products and receive bronze products from Subcarpathia and Transcarpathia in return. So almost 100 years after it was discovered, the cauldron revealed one of its secrets. The Wild Garden settlement itself continues to reveal its mysteries to this very day, and every find is more fascinating than the last one.